So let's add a real database now, and for this I'll again use MongoDB, because it's easy to use, very popular, scalable, works great with JavaScript, and we can get started for free. So for this, let's visit mongodb.com, and there again, create an account if you don't have one yet. We did already create one in the last course sections though, so you can probably just log in with that. Make sure you have a look at those previous sections where we did already work with MongoDB if you skipped those before you continue with this lecture. So here I did log in again, and that brings me to my clusters. We're using MongoDB Atlas again, since that's this cloud offering with which we can get started with for free. And here we already got a cluster set up. Quickly double check that you do have your local IP whitelisted. If not, make sure you add it under network access so that your local server, your local machine can talk to that database. And make sure you also have at least one user with a read and write access and that you know the credentials of that user. Once all of that is set up, we can use MongoDB in our API route. And for this, we'll first of all quit the development server and install another third-party package, the MongoDB package, which is that official MongoDB driver which we need to talk to the database. And then we can start the development server again. With that installed in our contact API route, we can use MongoDB. Here we can import something from MongoDB, and that something which we import is the Mongo client, which we need for connecting and interacting. Now I want to connect to the database after we validated everything and once we have our object here which we want to store. So then I'll go ahead and use Mongo client instead of console logging to connect to the database. Now connect wants a connection string, and we get that by clicking on our cluster, connect your application, and taking that string. So that is the connection string we want to use here. And now here we need to plug in values for username, password, and database name. Now for the database name, you can use any name you want. I'll use my-site, so that the database, which will be created automatically by MongoDB, will be called my site. Now for the user data, I have a user named Maximilian, and I'll quickly create a new password here and update that user. And hence here I will use that username without the angle brackets and use that password for that user. And that should then enable MongoDB to connect. Now connect needs a callback, or we use the promise which it returns, and I'll do the latter with then or with async await, and I'll use async await here. So I will convert my handler function into an async function by adding the async keyword, and then we can await this connection here, and we get the connected client once this is done. Now this could fail, so we can already wrap that into a try-catch block, like this, and catch any potential errors we might be getting to return and not continue with the function execution if we have an error, and send back a response with a 500 status code, which means that something went wrong on the server, and then a message which we either extract from that error or to not give such information away to our front-end users, simply some generic data message like could not connect to database. Something like this. Now I'll convert my client into a variable which has the right scope. And hence now after this try-catch block, we have a connection and we can continue. Now here we want to use that connection to insert data. So therefore here we can use the client to get access to the database to which we connected here, my site. We could also switch to a different database by passing its name as an argument, but I'll stick to the connected database here. So then we get access to that database. Whoops, that should be a const. And then we can interact with that database. Now in MongoDB, data is stored in so-called collections. And hence the DB object has a collection method which allows us to work on a specific collection. Now the collection name is up to you. It will be created on the fly if it doesn't exist yet, and I'll name it messages. So now I'll interact with the messages collection, and on that collection I want to insert one new document. And that new document is this new message we construct up there. This object. That is the document that should be inserted into this collection. Now we can await this operation because it's asynchronous and returns a promise, and we'll then get our result of this operation eventually. Again, this could fail, so we can already wrap it with try catch. Catch any errors here, and if we have an error, return and not continue. Close the connection though with client close, and send back a response with a 500 status code with some data where we have a message of storing message failed or anything like that. But maybe we also succeeded, and in that case we'll send back that success response. We can also tweak our new message here and add a ID field or underscore ID, whatever you want, and set this equal to result.insertedID to have that automatically generated ID inserted into that message object after the message was inserted in the database. And then we send back that success response in the end. This now should work. This should insert a message into the database. The only remaining thing I want to do here is I also want to close the connection in the success case. And now with those changes made, if we give this a try, if we try submitting this message again here, so if we reload this page maybe, and then test this again, does this work? And I sent this message. I got no error here, that's good. Just some warnings, which we can ignore. And if we have a look at our database at the cluster, and we click on collections there, we can look into the collections we have here. And there we'll now see the My Site database with a messages collection, which indeed does contain that one message I just submitted. So storing that data in a database works, and now we are using MongoDB for that. Now what we're not doing here is we're not having any logic for fetching data. That is some functionality which we implemented earlier in the course already. We don't really need it here because the messages which are submitted should not be shown to the visitors of our page. Hence, we don't need to fetch and load them here. Instead, just having them in the database is nice, and we either then build some kind of administration interface for ourselves, the owner, to fetch the data there, or we just dive into the database to read messages users sent us here, and to then delete them once we read them. That could also be a viable option if we as the owner are the only one who needs to read them. And therefore we're done here in our application, in our project. Sending messages is enough, and that works. Now let's work on the front end again. Let's make sure that we give the user some feedback about what's going on, and of course let's make sure that we handle success and error cases.